Welcome to the Busy Girl's Guide to the Bible podcast. I'm Andrea, and this podcast is my own ramblings and lessons that I have learned in trying to balance being a Christian, a wife, a mom, a writer, a business owner, a photographer, a blogger, a friend, a daughter, a sister, and the 1 million other things that make me me. What I want so badly is to teach other women that the Bible doesn't have to be confusing or frustrating or even over your head. I want to teach you the ways that I have learned to carve out time not only to get into the Bible, but to apply it, make sense of it, and get practical takeaways in everyday life. Welcome back to the Busy Girl's Guide to the Bible podcast. I'm so excited that you're here, and I wanted to talk to you today about something it's going to be a bummer, but we're going to talk about anxiety and depression, because those topics are the most widely asked for topics of discussion in all the groups that I polled and all the women that I talked to. So I think it's really important. I think it's something that we need to begin to have that conversation and start being there for each other in the midst of all of this. Now, because of the gravity of this topic, what I want to do first is tell you I am not a doctor, can't diagnose you. And if you are struggling with either of these things, please go get help. And secondly, I want you to know that you're not alone. Oh my gosh, girl, you have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be afraid of. This is something that so many people deal with, and I'm going to get into statistics and how and why anxiety happens. And I hope by the end of this, you feel like, one, you're not a crazy person, and two, like you have a community of women who are all in the same boat that you're in. So like I said, if you need to see someone, please go see someone. There is no shame in that game. There is no shame in being on any kind of medication for it. If you need it, go do it. This whole thing is going to be coming from 2 Timothy 1:7. This verse is something that I carried with me literally when I was first learning about anxiety and learning what I was going through and how everything was working. So I literally kept this on a 3x5 card. I would keep it in my purse. I would keep it in my car because it was so empowering to read God's word saying, you know, I haven't given you this spirit of fear. I've given you power, love, and a sound mind. So I would repeat that to myself constantly. And it's something that I've carried with me literally and figuratively since I was 17. So it's a good one to have in your arsenal for when you are feeling nuts. It's been cool because so many people have reached out to me about anxiety and how they've struggled with it. And so I know that it's a topic that I'm in good company because a lot of you are sitting there sweaty and anxious with me. So power to us for being anxiety ridden, you know? So I want to tell you my story so that you know a little more about me, you know a little bit more about my background and why I am sitting here talking to you about this topic. I really didn't understand what was going on in my body when this first became a thing for me. And likely I was having anxiety, like a buildup over the years, and it didn't really manifest until I was about 17 years old. And that was when I really started to notice, changes in my body, changes in just how I felt overall. And honestly, just feeling that racing mind and like I was, like you're literally going crazy. So at 17, I went to a doctor and told her what I was feeling. And what I was feeling, for those of you who are not sure what the heck anxiety looks like, my mind was racing, my heart was racing, my extremities had tingling and numbness, I was sweaty, I just felt this overwhelming sense of fear and panic that it was like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but it didn't necessarily mean that anything bad was actually happening to me. It was my body's natural response of fight or flight even though there was no stressor. So imagine how exhausted you have to be all the time, feeling like it's this panic, like I have to get out of here or else something bad is going to happen, even though there's literally not anything going on. What I didn't understand at the time and what I understand now is that it's a chemical imbalance. It was beyond my control, but not knowing that at the time, it can make you feel so crazy. It can make you feel like you are absolutely losing your mind. And it's just not true. There's an actual physical, chemical thing that's going on in your body that's causing this. So let's just stop here. And I want you to repeat that to yourself. This is not something that you are doing to yourself. It's not something that, would you try to do this to yourself? Of course not. And people would tell me all the time, well, just stop. Just stop thinking about it. But my chemicals are out of whack. There's some kind of something inside of me that's not in sync and not doing what it needs to do. And once I got that concept, once I understood what was happening, there was so much freedom in that. And that didn't happen until, I was almost 30. So just a few years ago. I didn't really understand what was happening until it was randomly my OBGYN told me, girl, this is biology. Like, this is your chemical makeup. This is what's going on in your body it's not in your control. And that's okay. Because there's so many things that we can do to combat it and to work on it and to get better. But don't beat yourself up because it's out of your control. But again, I didn't know this until just a few years ago. So at 17, I'm sweaty and I'm anxious and I'm nervous all the time. And the first thing I know to do is to go to the doctor and get a prescription. So at 17, I'm on Lexapro. And I don't remember too much about that whole process. I know that I gained some weight. And so I went back and was like, hey, if we could go ahead and get me something that will make me skinny, that'd be great. So I bounced around with that kind of stuff for a while. But that feeling of dread and that feeling of just sheer panic never completely went away. I could function, but I didn't feel completely at ease. Throughout my 20s, I did the same thing, kind of bouncing around, and I'd go through periods where I felt better and I didn't have to take anything. And then other times, for whatever reason, hormones or chemical imbalance, I had to go back on Zoloft. And I don't say that with shame. I used to be really ashamed of that. And there was a big chunk of time when I didn't tell anyone. I told no one what was going on because it was embarrassing and I felt like I should be able to control this. And even, as recently as last year, I'll be honest, I'm a Christian, you know that. And my main thing that I do is essential oils. And I will tell you that makes me feel like a failure. I've gotten control over it more, but it definitely is something that I carry with me that I can't admit that. I can't tell anybody that. I'm supposed to be this oil guru who can solve any problem, any ailment, and I can't. It can take the edge off, but it doesn't fix my panic attacks. It doesn't make me feel completely in control of my thoughts and then the physicality of it. I still have the panic and the dread, and I have the sweaty hands. It doesn't fix it. And so for somebody who believes in God and who believes in oils, oh man, you want to talk about a hit to my identity? Big one. That was a big one. And it was so embarrassing. And I really struggled with it, and I kept it quiet for quite a long time because nobody would understand. Everyone would think I was a fraud. Everyone would think I was a failure. But when I finally got released from that, I feel like I was, I don't know, just completely free from the stigma and from feeling the weight of judgy eyes. Because everybody deals with it. And when I started to realize that, when I started to do research about it, and let's be honest, we know it's been in the news. So many people are struggling with it privately, quietly, and alone. And it's not really working out that great. There was a young pastor who took his own life a few weeks ago because he was struggling with this so quietly and so privately because it's not something that we can always address. For whatever reason, we want to pretend like this doesn't happen and like this isn't a thing. But girl, you know what? It is a thing. It's a big, fat thing. It's the elephant in the room. It's the reason that people are so isolated. It's a big part of why women judge other women. It's a big part of why there's this huge gap between making friends and being home alone. We are embarrassed. We are ashamed. And quite honestly, I'm really freaking sick of it. The only reason that I even know any of this now is because I set out to find out what it is that women struggle with so much in their everyday lives. And the number one thing was how to tackle and deal with anxiety and depression. Resounding. I mean, like, I couldn't not talk about it because so many of you are struggling with it right now. The biggest bout of anxiety that I've ever had came in the middle of our miscarriage stories. And I think it was somewhere, I know it was after that really awful one with the DNC, but I think it was somewhere between the fourth and the fifth miscarriage that it's like my mind and my body finally went, I can't do this anymore. And there were periods of time where I was having tingling in my hands. I was constantly stressed out. I was, however, I will admit, living on caffeine and not really taking care of my body. But I was so heartbroken and so sad. And the stressors of having so many miscarriages and just the internalizing all of that and feeling like, again, like I said, that I was a failure as a woman and that I was failing at what God had put me on this planet to do. All of that just undid me. And when I want to say about 28, I went through the worst anxiety I've ever had. And I don't know if you've ever been in that situation, but this is what it was like for me. Not only was I failing in motherhood and now I was failing in having it together, like just having a sound mind. I was losing it. And it slowly crept on. It wasn't like all of a sudden I woke up one day and I started having anxiety attacks again. It was this slow burn into more and more anxiety, more and more panic. And I felt like if I could just breathe through it, if I could just count to 10, that I could make it go away. But I think because of all the factors, because of everything that was going on in that in my life at that time, I needed more help. And it took me a while to do that because, I don't know, maybe pride, embarrassment, probably a lot of shame. But it got to the point where I couldn't leave the house. And I remember only a select few people knew what was going on. Only a few people were allowed to know that I was failing, that I was falling apart. And those few people came and they loved me and they cried with me and they encouraged me, but I couldn't get out of it. No amount of loving me through it or even being firm with me about it was going to shake it. It wasn't going to go away. And it was in all of that time that I finally kind of came to terms with it and went, okay, if this is what it's going to be like, then I have to be able to manage it. And if that means that I have to be on Zoloft for a little bit, I'm just going to do it because I couldn't function as a wife. I couldn't function as a mother. And I was honestly afraid that I was going to have to be committed because I was feeling completely off my rocker. I was completely panicky all the time. I prayed for sleep. I tried to sleep as much as humanly possible so that I didn't have to feel panicky. I didn't want to sit in this private hell that I was stuck in, that I couldn't get out of. And so it took a minute. It took me a while, but I finally decided, okay, I have to do this. Even if it's just for a season, I have to do this. And so I did. And for those of you who have ever been on anti-anxiety medication, you know that even just that first dose, you feel instantly better because you are taking that step to make yourself feel better. You are taking that step to take control of something that is completely out of your control. I don't know about you, but I can't balance the chemicals in my brain. I can't do that with my mind. There's something out of whack there. And so once I took that first step, and it was embarrassing. I mean, I didn't want to tell anybody. I was so full of shame over that I couldn't get it together, that I wasn't the Pinterest wife or mom. That was shameful. But I couldn't function. So I had to do it. So I took a deep breath. I took my Zoloft and I got on with life. And then I was able to go off of it. I got pregnant with the boys. And it wasn't until, a little bit after that I finally was able to kind of deal with it and work through it. And yes, I've seen counselors, and I fully believe that everyone should go to counseling. It is so good for you. But that wasn't where it ended. Counseling helped, absolutely. And I saw a Christian counselor, and that was amazing. And I love her so much to this day. But that's not the end of my story. My story keeps going. My anxiety thing, it's still there. She's like my shadow. And that's okay. But it wasn't okay for a long time. I felt like, man, I should be able to get control of this. But I'm telling you, that freedom of knowing that this is biological, that it's brain chemistry and environmental factors, all of those things play into anxiety and depression. When you can accept that, oh, girl, there's so much freedom in that. You're not in control. And the cool thing is, if you're like me and you start talking about it, other people start talking about it with you. Other people start telling you their story. You're not out there by yourself being sweaty. There's so many of us. We're all sweaty together. We're stressing out. We're having anxiety attacks. So much so, I will tell you, we'll get into it more next week, but did you know that 40 million people in the United States suffer from anxiety disorder? 18% of the population. Some are medicated, some are not. Some can deal with it, in different ways. And other people have to be on anxiety medication. And either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your story is. Your story is important. Your story is what makes you you. And so she can do it without anxiety meds and you have to. Who cares? You both can be sweaty together and talk about different things that you can do to make yourselves feel better. You can be honest about it. You can start the conversation, because it's a conversation we need to start having a lot. There's no reason to suffer in silence. There's no reason to suffer alone. 40 million Americans. That's a ton of people. This conversation needs to start now. We need to start accepting that this is something that people are dealing with, and we need to start working through it with them. I want to say too that I know that people who are listening who have never dealt with any kind of anxiety or depression, this might be a new topic for you, or obviously you've heard of it, or maybe you know somebody who's dealing with it. And I would encourage you to think about how this affects those people that you know. The next time you feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe she just needs to take a deep breath, think about what we talked about today. Think about the chemical makeup and the biology and everything that factors into it. I think you'll see it in a different light. I think a big part of why we don't understand it is because if we haven't dealt with it, we don't know the ins and outs of it. So I would encourage you to really take that to heart. And the next time you see a sweaty, anxious person, be gracious, because we feel crazy and we don't want you to think we're crazy too. Guys, that was heavy. And that's only part one. But I think it's so important, and I'm really, really grateful that so many of you said, like, hey, let's start this conversation. Let's talk about how to deal with it. And next week, we are going to get into it. We're going to talk more about what the science and the biology behind anxiety and depression, but also we're going to work on combating it and finding a tribe of people who are like us and dealing with the same thing. So I'm really glad that you stuck it out this week. I know it was heavy. I know it was hard, but guys, this is such an important topic. It's a conversation that we have to have. We have to start talking about it. We have to be okay with talking about our mental health and how important it is. We can't see more tragedies like this young pastor. It's heartbreaking and it's upsetting. And if we could be honest and open about it, I think there's so much freedom when we shed light on darkness. So let's just start talking about it. Let's just be open and honest and say the hard things. And as always, if you absolutely love this podcast and you can't wait for that notification on Tuesday mornings that a new episode has dropped, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave me a review so that I know how you're liking this. If you want to talk about a certain topic, let me know. I am so excited every week that I get to do this with you guys. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you next week.